The Nebraska Service Plaza. My name is Michael Brennan. I am a long-haul trucker with 23 years behind the wheel and over 2 million miles logged across the continental United States. For decades, my life was a pattern of highways, truck stops, and motels, a life defined by schedules, logbooks, and the monotony of endless asphalt. I had seen strange things over the years, breakdowns, accidents, storms, but I never considered myself prone to fear. The road was familiar, predictable, and I trusted it more than any person. That trust ended abruptly in August 2019. I had been driving from Chicago to Denver, a standard 12-hour stretch I'd done countless times. My logbook read full, my body was drained. My mind was numb from highway hypnosis. Around 3:47 a.m., I needed rest more than anything. The GPS indicated a service plaza 6 miles ahead, a standard stop along I-80. I had no reason to suspect anything out of the ordinary. As I exited the highway, a strange stillness greeted me. The plaza appeared almost too perfect. Fluorescent lights cast a uniform glare over empty asphalt. Parking lines were pristine. Not a single vehicle. The building itself, glass, steel, modern, looked entirely out of place amid the rolling Nebraska farmland. The silence felt unnatural. I parked my rig and approached the entrance. Automatic doors opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the space was immaculate. White tile floors reflected the harsh lighting. A convenience store stocked with every imaginable item sat to the left, while 3 fast food counters lined the right. All were closed, yet the lights burned brightly. Behind the information desk was a young woman in uniform. Her smile was perfect, teeth unnaturally white. "Welcome to Centennial Plaza. How can I help you tonight?" she asked. Her tone was cordial but mechanical, too precise, too rehearsed. I asked for the restrooms. She gestured down a hallway with a rigid, deliberate motion. That should have been my first warning. The bathrooms were spotless, the air smelling sharply of industrial cleaner. I splashed cold water on my face and looked into the mirror. Behind my reflection, the door I'd entered through appeared different. Metal, rusted hinges. When I turned, the door was modern, matching the plaza I had seen outside. I shook it off and returned to the lobby. The woman was still seated, identical in posture and expression. I asked about the plaza's history. "Since 1997, she said. "We've been serving travelers for 22 years. I checked my phone. August 2019. The numbers matched, but her words carried an unplaceable chill. I went to the coffee dispenser. Steam rose, but the liquid was cold. Pouring it into a cup, I watched. The coffee fell in a perfect, silent stream and vanished into the drain. My unease deepened. Then I noticed the cameras. Dozens, all pointed inward at the lobby. None faced the parking lot or entrance. They were monitoring only the interior. I asked how many visitors the plaza typically received. "You're the first this week," she replied. Her smile did not falter. I glanced at the logbook on her desk. A handwritten ledger, upside-down entries legible from where I stood. Every page bore the same date. August 14th. Repeated endlessly, decades-old ink mimicking the present. My hands began to shake. I asked to use the payphone, a reflex I couldn't explain. She nodded toward a wall where a payphone had appeared. Lifting the receiver, I heard a distorted dial tone, layered and unnatural. I hung up. When I looked back, there were 3 identical women behind the desk, all in perfect formation. 7 by the time I approached the exit. They spoke in unison. "Sir, you need to complete your check-in. We have your room ready." Room? I hadn't booked anything. Panic set in. The lights flickered. In those brief dark intervals, the plaza revealed its true state: abandoned, decaying, walls blackened with mold, floor tiles cracked and littered with debris. In the light, everything appeared new. I slammed my shoulder into the automatic doors. Nothing. Glass shimmered but did not yield. I broke through on the third attempt, shards cutting my arms, and dove to the asphalt. Behind me, synchronized footsteps followed. My truck appeared in the parking lot, but it was old, rusted, wrong. I jumped in, shaking, and drove. Side mirrors reflected only darkness. I continued for 6 hours straight, only stopping in Omaha. I reported the incident to the Highway Patrol. They investigated the mile marker. Official records confirmed no service plaza existed there. The land belonged to a private family. No structures had stood for decades. Weeks later, trucker Daniel Kovacs vanished along that stretch of I-80. His rig was abandoned, engine running, logbook open to the last entry. Stopping at Rest Plaza. Need coffee? Something feels off. Nebraska State Police searched 3 miles around the site. They uncovered a buried foundation 3 feet under topsoil, the remnants of a service plaza built in 1997, operational for 6 days. 12 employees had died in a gas leak during the night of August 14, 1997. The site was quietly demolished. Settlements issued under NDAs. EPA tests recorded abnormal electromagnetic readings and unidentified organic compounds in the soil. I have not driven that route since. Even on other highways, a perfectly illuminated, too clean rest area can trigger memories. The synchronized footsteps, the smiles, the cold coffee. Whatever lingered at that mile marker remains. Waiting, watching. Somewhere, Daniel Kovacs is still missing. The Arkansas Detour. In October of 2020, my life was structured, predictable, and documented. I was 34 years old, based in Memphis, working as a freelance photojournalist with a steady rotation of regional assignments. My work focused on rural American decline, towns hollowed out by factory closures, shrinking populations, and infrastructure decay. I worked alone most of the time. I drove my own vehicle, carried redundant navigation tools, and logged my routes carefully. I did not drink on assignment. I did not take risks for atmosphere. I followed safety protocols because I'd learned early in my career that remote areas don't forgive mistakes. At the time, I was compiling material for a long-form documentary project on abandoned communities in the Ozarks. I had permits, press credentials, and a pre-planned route that would take me through northern Arkansas and back toward Missouri within 3 days. Nothing about the trip was improvised. Until the detour. On the afternoon of October 17th, I encountered a state-posted road closure on the main highway due to a rock slide. Temporary signage redirected traffic onto Route 127. The detour appeared legitimate. Reflective markers, consistent spacing, and state-standard lettering. My GPS recalculated automatically, then lost signal approximately 15 miles into the forested area. This was not unusual for the region. I switched to a paper map and continued. I logged the time as approximately 2:50 p.m. After roughly 40 minutes of driving, Route 127 opened into a town. There was no welcome sign, no municipal marker, and no visible town name. The layout was compact. A single main street with about 20 buildings. Post office, diner, gas station, general store, municipal offices. Architecture placed construction between the early 1960s and mid-1970s. Everything appeared intact, maintained, in use. Vehicles were parked curbside, older models but clean and functional. People were present, walking, entering buildings, sitting inside. There was no visible damage, abandonment, or decay. What struck me immediately was the silence, not the absence of sound, but the absence of reaction. No one looked at my vehicle as I drove down the street. I parked in front of the diner and entered. The interior smelled of fresh food, coffee, bacon, baked goods. A waitress stood at the counter pouring coffee for an elderly man seated alone in a booth. I sat at the counter and waited. She never acknowledged me. She finished pouring, placed the pot down, and walked into the kitchen without looking in my direction. The man continued reading his newspaper. I could see the date clearly printed at the top, October 17th, 1972. I spoke. I cleared my throat. I stood. There was no response. When I waved my hand inches from the man's face, he turned the page. I exited the diner and entered the general store. The same phenomenon repeated. People interacted with objects and each other but never responded to my presence. Movements appeared slightly delayed, as if the pacing of the environment was subtly misaligned. Through my camera's viewfinder, the scene looked normal. When viewed directly, something was off. Motion lagged. Gestures repeated with mechanical consistency. I began noticing dates, calendars, newspapers, receipts. Everyone read October 1972. At the gas station, I attempted to refuel. The pump was mechanical. When I touched the nozzle, frost formed instantly on the metal. Inside the station, a mechanic sat at a desk writing in a ledger. The calendar on the wall read October 1972. I photographed everything. When I reviewed the images later, every file taken inside the town was corrupted. Distorted geometry, elongated shapes. In each frame, the sky rendered black. Regardless of daylight conditions, those files remain archived with the investigation. When my vehicle failed to start, I flagged down a police cruiser that appeared behind me. 1970s model, period-correct markings. The officer exited, walked past me without acknowledgement, returned to his vehicle and drove away at a constant speed. The cruiser vanished at a dead end that should not have allowed any exit. When I later reported this incident, initial responses from local authorities were dismissive. I was told the area had no towns, no detours, no records of Route 127 connecting to anything populated. My car restarted without explanation. I drove away, but the road changed, pavement degraded, vegetation closed in. The fuel gauge dropped to empty while the engine continued running. After an indeterminate amount of time, the vehicle failed completely. Silence followed. No wildlife, no wind, no ambient noise. I encountered a rusted road sign, Thornton, population 347. Below it, spray-painted, turn back. Through my camera lens, additional text appeared, scratched into the metal. October 17th, 1972. Gas leak, everyone asleep, nobody woke up. Further along the road, I found a 1971 Ford Galaxy. Inside was a deceased driver, fully desiccated, hands locked on the steering wheel. The fuel gauge read empty. Disorientation escalated rapidly. The road repeated. Distance collapsed. Physical exhaustion set in. I experienced acute panic and loss of temporal awareness. I ran until the forest abruptly ended. I emerged onto the actual highway. Modern vehicles, modern signage. A semi-truck narrowly avoided hitting me. A state trooper stopped. She was real. Her radio worked. I told her everything. She did not interrupt. The trooper showed me a record. Thornton, Arkansas, October 1972. A natural gas leak killed all 347 residents in their sleep. The town was demolished. The land declared uninhabitable. The Arkansas State Police later recovered my vehicle on an unmapped logging road. Out of gas, battery dead. Scratched into the hood, 347 geological surveys identified residual gas pockets, elevated radon levels, and electromagnetic anomalies consistent with localized temporal distortion. The site is now fenced and federally restricted. Every October 17th, locals report lights in the forest, structures that flicker into view, roads that appear only briefly. My photographs remain corrupted. My GPS logs show missing time. I no longer photograph rural towns, because some places do not decay, they repeat, and if you arrive on the wrong day, they will not let you leave until they're finished with you. The California Highway 1 Vanishing. I retired from the California Highway Patrol in early 2017 after 28 years of service, most of them spent in coastal traffic enforcement and collision investigation. Retirement did not change my habits as much as people assume. I still woke before sunrise. I still read incident logs the way other people read the news. I lived alone in a modest house inland, far enough from the coast that the fog didn't reach me. My days were quiet, structured, and intentionally uneventful. I had spent my career believing that if you followed procedure, documented thoroughly, and respected evidence, the truth would eventually settle into something usable. That belief held until the summer of 2018. The call came in as a consulting request, not an active duty assignment. A former supervisor asked if I would review a string of disappearances along a remote stretch of Highway 1 between Big Sur and San Simeon. Officially, it was a cold case review. Unofficially, they were running out of explanations that fit inside a report. Over 6 weeks, 7 vehicles had been found abandoned along a 12-mile section of road. Engines running, keys in the ignition. Personal belongings untouched. No skid marks, no signs of struggle, no witnesses. The drivers were simply gone. CHP had exhausted standard search protocols and needed someone who knew that coastline well enough to notice what others might miss. I agreed, assuming I would be confirming an error in procedure or a missed environmental factor. That assumption lasted less than a day. The stretch of Highway 1 in question is isolated even by California standards. Steep cliffs drop directly into the Pacific. Pullouts are few and designed for brief stops, not lingering. At night, the ocean absorbs light. Fog rolls in without warning and erases depth perception. There is no nearby development, no cell service in long segments, and very little traffic after midnight. It is the kind of place where a single mistake can look like intentional disappearance if you don't know what you're looking at. I arrived just after 3 a.m. on June 22, 2018, responding to the 7th vehicle, a sedan belonging to Jennifer Torres, a medical resident driving home from San Francisco after a late shift. Her car was parked at a scenic overlook. Driver's door open, headlights on, engine running. Her purse, phone, and a half-eaten sandwich sat on the passenger seat. There was no indication she planned to leave the vehicle. The ocean that night was calm and black, the kind of stillness that usually simplifies a search. We deployed spotlights along the cliff face, brought in dogs, and requested a helicopter at a first light. There was nothing. No footprints, no disturbed brush, no evidence of a fall. Her phone record showed her last activity at 1:47 a.m., a text to her roommate that read, "Pulling over. Need to see this." That phrasing mattered. People don't write that when they're tired or distracted. They write it when they think they've encountered something specific. Over the next week, I reviewed the previous 6 cases. The victims had no connection to one another. 3 tourists, 2 truck drivers, 1 local fisherman, and now a doctor. Different ages, different schedules, different weather conditions. The only constant was location. Every vehicle had been found within the same 12-mile stretch. When you remove everything else, geography becomes motive. I began driving the section repeatedly at different times of day, logging visibility, light angle, traffic flow, and environmental conditions. On a clear afternoon with full visibility, halfway through the stretch, I noticed something that forced me to pull over. Set back approximately 15 feet from the standard guardrail was a second guardrail, older and partially obscured by coastal scrub. It wasn't on any maintenance map. It was weathered, bent outward in 3 distinct places, consistent with vehicle impact. The metal felt cold despite direct sunlight and was coated in a thin film that behaved like oil but evaporated on contact. When I looked over the edge, the drop to the ocean appeared normal, but my depth perception felt wrong, as if distance was being misreported by my own senses. I took out my phone to document the anomaly. Through the screen, I could see something I could not see with my eyes alone. A road, winding down the cliff face at an impossible angle, faint but structurally coherent. When I lowered the phone, it disappeared. I requested a technical team immediately. While waiting, I re-examined the victims' phones. 3 of the 7 had taken photographs shortly before disappearing. The images showed a road sign none of our surveys accounted for. Scenic route, next right, 0.3 miles. Highway 1 is the scenic route. There is no secondary designation. The tech team arrived with ground-penetrating radar and electromagnetic scanners. Their findings did not align with known infrastructure. Beneath the current highway was another road structure. It registered on radar but had no visual presence. Asphalt samples suggested a construction date in the 1930s, but the molecular composition did not match any materials used in that era. Historical research filled in the rest. In 1934, an early version of Highway 1 had been proposed through this section, but officially abandoned due to engineering impossibility, cliff instability, budget overruns, standard reasons. But payment records told a different story. Caltrans had paid Meridian Construction Company $2.3 million to build a 15-mile coastal road in 1935. The project was completed in 8 months. In November of that year, the road was officially canceled, and all records were sealed. I obtained a court order to unseal them. The road had been open for 4 days. 43 vehicles had driven onto it. None were ever recovered. The military closed the site, demolished visible sections, and poured the modern Highway 1 directly over it. They could not remove it completely. We installed surveillance cameras focused on the phantom guardrail. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. On the 4th week, during a fog event, the cameras recorded a sedan pulling off the highway onto a road that did not exist to the naked eye. The vehicle descended at an angle no road should support and vanished from frame. Frame-by-frame enhancement showed the driver's face. She appeared confused but not frightened, as if the road presented itself as normal to her perception. The Department of Transportation convened an emergency meeting. Closure and rerouting were discussed. Then the disappearances stopped. No incidents for 2 months. The pressure eased. That was when Jennifer Torres called 911. The call came in at 4:17 a.m. on August 3, 2018, 6 weeks after she vanished. Her voice was calm, almost flat. She said she was on Highway 1, heading north, and needed to know where the exit was because her shift started in an hour. She insisted it was June 17th. The dispatcher tried to orient her. Jennifer grew confused, but not distressed. Then she mentioned other cars pulled over, people standing outside them, watching the ocean. Some of them, she said, looked like they'd been there a long time. Someone was waving at her, asking her to stop. The dispatcher told her not to. The line went dead. We found her vehicle 3 hours later at the same overlook where she originally disappeared. Engine running, door open. This time, her medical ID badge was on the dashboard. The photo was hers. The expiration date read 1935. The stretch of highway was closed permanently in September 2018 for geological instability. The real findings are classified. The Phantom Road remains active under specific conditions. The California Highway Patrol now maintains an undisclosed checkpoint before the area. Drivers who report seeing a secondary guardrail or a scenic route sign are turned around immediately. Despite this, people still disappear along the coast. 3 more since 2018 in locations that previously showed no anomalies. We believe the road is spreading, overlaying itself onto new sections of highway. I think about those drivers often. I think about what happens when you run out of gas on a road that was never supposed to exist, watching an ocean that doesn't behave like water anymore, waiting for an exit that history insists was closed nearly a century ago. The Midwest Convoy, I worked in logistics for most of my adult life. By 2021, I was a senior route coordinator for a national shipping company, the kind of position where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. My job was numbers, schedules, and exceptions. When a truck was late, I found out why. When a driver missed a check-in, I tracked the delay. 99% of the time, the explanation was mundane: weather, traffic, fatigue, equipment trouble. I worked out of a regional office outside St. Louis, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. My evenings were quiet, my weekends predictable. I trusted systems because systems usually worked. In March of that year, 3 of our trucks failed to check in during overnight runs through southern Illinois. That alone wasn't unusual. What made it my problem was the timing and proximity. All 3 were on the same route, St. Louis to Indianapolis, running I-70 east before cutting north on state highways. A route we ran every night, sometimes with a dozen vehicles. Within 2 weeks, 3 trucks went silent. GPS trackers stopped transmitting. Drivers didn't respond to radio, phone, or emergency ping. The trucks were recovered within days. All 3 were found parked neatly at truck stops or rest areas within a 50-mile radius. Cargo untouched, doors locked. No signs of struggle, no mechanical failure. The drivers were simply gone. The company handled it quietly. Missing drivers were bad optics. Law enforcement was notified, but there was no press. Internally, it was labeled an anomalous operations review. I was sent to retrace the route, talk to anyone who might have seen the drivers, and review available footage. No escorts, no formal investigation authority. Just me, a rental car, and instructions to document everything. I started at the St. Louis Distribution Center and followed the exact route the missing trucks had taken. Day 1 was unremarkable. Highway, farmland, small towns, the kind of landscape you stop noticing after a while. I reviewed traffic camera footage at rest areas. Most of it was grainy and incomplete. I spoke to clerks who barely remembered the nights in question. Nothing stood out until I reached Vandalia, Illinois. I stopped at a truck stop just outside town around 10:30 p.m., intentionally matching the time window when the missing drivers would have passed through. The night manager was a woman named Carol. When I showed her photos of our trucks, she recognized them immediately. "They all stopped here," she said. Different nights, same time window, between midnight and 2. She told me the drivers acted normally, bought coffee, used the restroom, talked about the weather. What stuck with her was a question each one asked before leaving. How far to the junction? When she asked which junction, all three drivers gave the same answer. Exit 112. I checked my map. There was no exit 112 on that stretch of I-70. The exits jumped from 108 to 115, a long gap explained by federal land restrictions. I assumed it was a mistake, thanked her, and left, but the question stayed with me. I reached the stretch between exits 108 and 115 at 11:45 p.m. The highway was empty. No moon. My headlights illuminated nothing but asphalt and distant fields. I slowed down, scanning for signage. That's when I saw it. A green exit sign on the right shoulder. Exit 112, North Junction, Services. It was standard in every way: font, reflectivity, placement, maintained, clean. My GPS showed nothing. I pulled over and got out. The sign was real. Cold metal, regulation bolts. I took photos. Later, every image would be blurred, as if the sign resisted being recorded. Against my better judgment, I took the exit. The off-ramp curved down and away from the highway, unlit and silent. After half a mile, it leveled onto a 2-lane road. That's where I saw the trucks. Dozens of semis lined both shoulders in perfect formation. Running lights on, engines idling, no drivers visible. The air smelled of diesel and something organic, decaying. I approached the nearest truck. The cab was empty, keys in the ignition, logbook open. The last entry was dated 1997. The next truck, 2003. The next, 1989. Different companies, different eras, same condition, all abandoned, all still running. At the end of the line, I found one of ours. The driver's seat was warm. His personal effects were there. I plugged in his phone. The last call was to his wife. Taking a quick break at a junction, be home soon. That call was 2 weeks old. When I tried to turn around, I realized the road only went forward. No intersections, no turnouts, just blackness ahead. After 20 minutes, I reached a building, a brightly lit truck stop, modern, clean. The sign read, North Junction Services, open 24 hours. Inside, everything was stocked and functioning. Behind the counter stood an older man in a uniform that didn't match any company I knew. I asked where I was. Exit 112, he said. North Junction. I asked about missing drivers. He pulled out a binder filled with names, dates, and truck numbers. Hundreds of entries, going back to 1963. We're not on any map, he said. This exit exists in the gaps. When conditions are right, drivers see it, they take it, and they end up here. How do they leave? He gestured to the road. They keep driving. Some find an exit, some don't. I ran. I drove until my fuel gauge hit empty. The clock stopped advancing. When the engine died, I got out and walked until I saw another sign. Return route, exit only. That ramp brought me back to I-70 at dawn. A state trooper found me an hour later. I was dehydrated, disoriented. The official diagnosis was exhaustion and possible hallucination. But my car was where I said it would be, out of gas. The odometer showed an extra 347 miles. I submitted everything to my company. They fired me. I didn't fight it. The FBI later acknowledged an open file on unexplained trucker disappearances along I-70. Over 200 cases in 40 years, no conclusions. Exit 112 still appears. I've seen it since, always at night, always when traffic is light, and every time there's a truck taking the exit. The Texas Rest Stop Attendant. My name is Elena Vasquez. In 2019, I worked for the state as a rest area attendant in West Texas. Before that assignment, my life was stable and quiet. I worked public facilities, visitor centers, roadside stops, places designed to be invisible. My routine was simple: arrive early, log maintenance issues, restock pamphlets, clean surfaces, and keep an eye on things overnight. I preferred night shifts. Less conversation, fewer variables. I lived in a small apartment in El Paso and drove home after sunrise, slept through the heat, and repeated the cycle. The trigger event was a reassignment email from the regional supervisor in June. A rest area on I-10 needed overnight coverage. The previous attendant had transferred out with little notice. The location was 40 miles east of Van Horn, one of the longest uninterrupted stretches of highway in the state. The email framed it as temporary. I accepted, because the overtime pay mattered and because nothing about a rest stop suggested risk. The drive out made the isolation clear. Once you leave the city, the landscape flattens and stretches until distance loses meaning. The rest area sat alone between exits, surrounded by scrub and open sky. No nearby towns, no visible structures. At night, the darkness was complete except for the parking lot lights. Cell reception was unreliable. Radios worked, but only on certain channels. The facility itself was standard. 2 parking sections, one for passenger vehicles and one for trucks. Restrooms, vending machines, and a small glass booth where I logged entries and monitored cameras. Overnight traffic was minimal. On most shifts, fewer than 10 vehicles stopped. The quiet was consistent, predictable. Early irregularities started in my first week. Between 2:00 and 3 a.m., older sedans began pulling in. Always models from the late 1980s or early 1990s. They drove slowly, parked in the farthest space in Section E4, and stayed exactly 11 minutes. The drivers didn't come inside. I timed it after the 3rd night because the consistency stood out. I initially assumed coincidence. Long drives blur judgment, but the pattern held, same window of time, same behavior. When I mentioned it to the day attendant, she dismissed it as fatigue. "Overnights mess with your head," she said. She wouldn't look at the camera feed while she said it. As nights passed, I started noticing repetition elsewhere, the same colors. The same body language in drivers who did step out. Hesitation at the restroom door, a pause, then retreat. I reviewed old shift logs and found vague notes from previous attendants. Lingering vehicles, no entry, odd timing. Nothing escalated, nothing formal. The first hard evidence came on my 8th night. I approached a tan 1987 Buick Lisabor parked under a light post. The driver, a woman around 50, asked me what year it was. She said she was looking for her daughter, 9 years old, who had been in the back seat. When I turned to check, the seat was empty. I offered to call for help. When I looked back, the car was gone. I reviewed the security footage immediately. The recording showed me walking up to an empty space and speaking to nothing. No car entered, no car left. The timestamp aligned with my memory. I saved the clip and backed it up. Institutional resistance followed quietly. When I reported the footage anomaly to my supervisor, I was told the cameras were outdated and prone to glitches. A request for maintenance review was closed without inspection. I was advised to focus on duties. The escalation into personal danger wasn't dramatic, it was psychological. On the 15th night, a white 1984 Chevrolet Caprice arrived. The driver approached my booth and asked where and when he was. He said he'd stopped during an accident in 1998. When I looked down to call for assistance, he vanished, leaving the car running and empty. Highway Patrol responded. They confirmed the vehicle belonged to a man who had died in a 1998 pileup near that rest area. The VIN matched. The car was impounded. By morning, it was gone. No release paperwork existed. The critical evidence came after I began researching on my own. I found accident reports, archived news photos, and maintenance logs. Section E4 had been repaved 7 times in 40 years due to subsurface anomalies. Marginal notes mentioned cold spots, equipment failure, and worker refusals at night. A retired maintenance worker told me a child had gone missing from that exact spot shortly after the rest area opened. The life-threatening moment was internal. I realized I was interacting with something that followed rules I didn't understand, in a place no one wanted examined. I quit within days. The institutional response was denial. Requests for historical footage were refused. Records were sealed. The rest area remained open. The unresolved threat is ongoing. I still pass that stretch of I-10. I never stop. Between 2 and 3 a.m., the lot still fills, 11 minutes at a time. Some journeys there never end. The Appalachian Tunnel. My name is Dr. Marcus Holloway. I'm a structural engineer specializing in transportation infrastructure, with a focus on aging tunnels and mountain pass systems. For most of my career, my work has been predictable. Stress fractures, water intrusion, outdated ventilation, problems you can document, model, and fix. In September of 2020, I was reminded that not every structural failure is mechanical. At the time, I was consulting for several state transportation departments, rotating between projects. My days were spent reviewing inspection reports, my nights writing recommendations that would likely be ignored due to cost. I didn't believe in folklore tied to infrastructure. I believed in load ratings and material fatigue. That mindset is what made me useful to the West Virginia Department of Transportation, and what made me unprepared. The call came from a regional WVDOT supervisor. They wanted an assessment of the Blackwater Tunnel, a single-lane highway tunnel through Spruce Mountain that had been closed since 2003. The state was considering reopening it to relieve traffic between 2 declining towns, Thornhill and Marrow Creek. My assignment was simple: determine whether rehabilitation was feasible or whether permanent sealing was required. We arrived early on a gray September morning. The tunnel entrance sat in a shallow cut in the mountain, surrounded by dense forest. No nearby residences. No ambient noise beyond wind through the trees. The southern gate had been cut open, just as prior incident reports indicated. Fresh tire tracks led into the darkness. That detail was logged, photographed, and reported before we entered. Inside, the tunnel showed expected decay, spalling concrete, rusted fixtures, water seepage. But there was also evidence of recent use: litter, footprints, and further in, the remains of a campfire. This conflicted with local enforcement reports claiming the area was regularly patrolled. When we radioed in our findings, the response was delayed and dismissive. 400 yards in, we found the first vehicle. A 2015 Honda Civic parked neatly against the wall. Doors locked, no damage. Dust suggested it had been there for months. Local police confirmed it had been reported stolen 6 months earlier. As we moved deeper, I began noticing something else. Our distance readings didn't align. We were covering more ground than the tunnel's known length allowed. At the halfway point, the temperature dropped sharply. Our lights flickered. Robert, one of my technicians, pointed ahead. At the edge of visibility, a figure was moving away from us. human-shaped, dark clothing. We called out, no response. Kira checked her thermal scanner, no heat signature. Still, we could all see it. That moment is documented in our audio logs, our voices calm but increasingly controlled. I reported the anomaly to our WV. Contact, requesting local law enforcement presence. The reply came back that we should complete the inspection efficiently and avoid speculation. No one asked for our recordings. No one suggested turning back. That was the first clear indication that the state wanted an outcome, not an explanation. We followed the figure for nearly 200 yards. It maintained a fixed distance, never closer, never farther. Then it stopped. We stopped. It turned, raised an arm, and pointed back toward the entrance. Then it was gone. Not retreating, not hiding, simply absent. The tunnel fell silent in a way I can't quantify. Even the water dripping from the ceiling seemed to pause. Despite my team's objections, I pushed us onward. At roughly 1.1 miles in, we found a side passage cut into the rock, unmarked, unrecorded, and absent from every blueprint I'd reviewed. We entered and followed it into a cavern so large our lights couldn't find the ceiling. Inside were dozens of vehicles, parked in rows. The newest dated to 1999, the oldest to the early 1960s. Every vehicle contained at least one body, mummified, desiccated, still seated. Some cars held entire families. All were facing the same direction, toward another tunnel leading deeper into the mountain. That tunnel was paved with degraded asphalt and dead lighting fixtures. I recognized it immediately. This wasn't an addition. It was older than the 1957 Blackwater Tunnel. It was the original. When we returned to the main tunnel, we encountered 7 figures standing in a line across the roadway, identical silhouettes pointing back toward the cavern. We ran in the opposite direction, abandoning equipment. We emerged from the northern exit and drove directly to the state police. A multi-agency response followed. State police, federal investigators, forensic teams. After 8 hours, the teams reported finding nothing. No side passage, no cavern, no vehicles, no bodies. Only faint markings carved into the tunnel wall, dates from 1961 to 2003, each paired with a number, 43 dates, numbers totaling 116. Subsequent research confirmed that 116 people vanished in or near the tunnel during those years. Internal memos showed the state knew. The bypass highway wasn't about safety upgrades, it was about containment. My recommendation was immediate demolition. It was rejected due to budget constraints. The tunnel remains sealed but standing. People still breach it. 2 hikers vanished last year. Their car was found at the southern entrance. I've since spoken with retired engineers who admit older tunnels were sometimes built over abandoned ones, records quietly lost. The cavern is still there. Whatever caused those disappearances is still there. And eventually, someone will go looking again. The Florida Keys Bridge. My name is Coast Guard Lieutenant Rachel Mendez. I have served over a decade in search and rescue operations along the Florida Keys, trained to respond to every conceivable maritime emergency. My daily routine was structured, methodical, patrol schedules, equipment checks, dive drills, and monitoring distress calls. I had encountered missing vessels, storm emergencies, even rare shark attacks. The ocean has its dangers, but they are finite, predictable, until August 12, 2021. The call came just after 9 p.m. A motorist reported a vehicle driving off the old 7-mile bridge. Not the active US 1 bridge, but the abandoned parallel structure closed since 1982. The man's voice was urgent, nearly panicked. By the time I mobilized my team and boarded our patrol boat, I assumed we were responding to a routine missing car report. I could not have been more wrong. Arriving at the specified coordinates, we found nothing. No debris, no oil slick, no indication a car had ever entered the water. We conducted a 3-hour sweep using sonar and spotlights. The water was calm, glassy, reflecting the moon. Nothing beneath the surface suggested an accident. Dispatch reported 2 more calls, almost simultaneously describing the same scenario. A dark sedan driving past the barriers of the old bridge, plunging into the void. We expanded our search. As we approached the old bridge's remnants, we observed tire tracks, fresh impressions in the asphalt overgrown with weeds. They led straight to a 100-foot gap in the bridge, a section that had been missing for decades. The tracks ended abruptly. We photographed everything meticulously. Patterns began to emerge. Additional tracks, dozens in total, faded but visible, led to the same gap. Some were recent, others appeared older, decades old. The repetition suggested something recurring, systematic. Standing at the gap, I noticed the water's reflection. The bridge appeared whole, extending beneath the surface with street lamps lining it. I looked directly at the water. There was nothing there. Yet the reflection persisted, an exact duplication of a road that shouldn't exist. My crew member, Petty Officer Dawson, witnessed the same phenomenon. At 2:47 a.m., headlights emerged on the bridge, approaching the gap from Marathon. I signaled with a spotlight. The car did not slow. It passed directly over the void, descending at a steady angle. There was no splash, no resistance. Headlights dimmed gradually, disappearing beneath the waves. Sonar readings confirmed nothing. The water depth was normal, sandy bottom, no structure. Yet in the reflection the car remained visible, following an underwater continuation of the bridge. Historical research revealed more anomalies. The 7-mile bridge's original construction in 1912, the 1935 hurricane, and subsequent labor-related deaths all suggested an unusual pattern. Over 400 workers perished during the hurricane, many unrecovered. Archival testimony from a railroad engineer, Thomas Whitmore, claimed the collapse was not due to weather, but because the road wanted to go where roads don't belong. His statements were dismissed at the time as trauma-induced. Additional investigation revealed 47 documented vehicle disappearances between 1960 and 1982. No wreckage, no fatalities recovered. National Park Service dive logs from 1998 referenced linear structures at 200 feet depth, possibly artificial, but deemed inconclusive. Institutional response was immediate when I submitted reports. My commanding officer ordered me to drop the investigation, classifying my August 12th findings as unverified civilian reports. The official stance ignored eyewitness testimony and sonar data. Refusing to let it go, I commissioned a private underwater ROV survey. At 180 feet, the cameras captured the impossible. A descending concrete and asphalt road, intact, overgrown with marine life. Dozens of vehicles were visible, in varying stages of decay, all facing the same direction, all descending along the path. The road extended beyond the ROV's range, perfectly intact, entirely inconsistent with known geography. The footage was submitted to the Coast Guard. The report was classified. I was transferred to another station and instructed that discussing the incident publicly would result in dishonorable discharge. Analyzing the recordings, subtle movement within the submerged vehicles became apparent. Shadows shifted, suggesting occupants, though indistinct. The recurring appearances of this road corresponded to specific environmental conditions, tidal phases, lunar cycles, and measurable electromagnetic anomalies. It became evident that drivers who entered the old bridge at the wrong time were guided along this anomalous route, disappearing without physical trace. I reviewed Monroe County Sheriff traffic camera footage over the past 5 years. Vehicles had been seen leaving US 1 onto the shoulder, circumventing barriers, and entering the abandoned bridge. No recovery efforts were recorded. The phenomenon revealed a consistent hidden conspiracy. The bridge's anomalous extension had been noticed for decades, yet local authorities consistently dismissed incidents. Institutional silence and bureaucratic inaction had allowed countless disappearances. The water beneath the old bridge is deceptively calm. Yet, standing there at night, you feel the presence of something watching, waiting. The sea is still, and then faintly, you sense movement along a path unseen, a silent dread that does not manifest in sound but is unmistakable to anyone who observes. Even now, alerts from local law enforcement arrive on my off-duty phone. Missing vehicle reports clustering around the new moon. Each corresponds to the bridge. Each follows the same impossible sequence. The underwater road persists. Vehicles continue to descend. Lights remain visible, guiding travelers toward a destination that does not exist within our physical world. And the drivers? They are still moving forward, compelled along a route that is unending, beneath waves, beyond human reach. I have come to understand one truth. This is not a road, not in the conventional sense. It is a liminal corridor, bridging our world with something else entirely. I have watched the footage countless times. Every viewing reinforces a singular, terrifying conclusion. This bridge, this road, and the vehicles upon it exist in a space outside regulated reality. Drivers believe they are traveling home. They are not. They are lost, forever following the lights along a path that never ends. The 7-mile bridge continues to carry thousands daily. Most never notice the old structure alongside. Some do. Some step into the anomaly, and some never return. The road waits, still intact beneath the water, still accepting travelers. And somewhere, deep in the ocean, the cars continue their silent descent. Shadows inside, lights on, forever guided along a path not of this world. The Colorado Mountain Pass. Before January 2022, my work followed a predictable rhythm. I'm a wildlife biologist with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Winters are usually paperwork heavy. Population models, migration forecasts, vehicle collision mitigation. When I was in the field, it was typically to document scarcity, not absence. Animals move less in deep snow, but they never completely vanish. Not in the Rockies, not ever. The call from Colorado State Patrol came through a regional coordinator, framed as a traffic safety issue. Elk and mule deer were behaving erratically near Monarch Pass. Motorists were swerving. Patrol wanted wildlife input. It sounded routine. The assignment became official 2 days later. A 3-mile stretch of US 50, mile markers 228 through 231, had been flagged as an animal avoidance zone. Not a migration shift. Not weather-driven displacement. Animals were approaching the area and then retreating abruptly, sometimes colliding with guardrails or each other in the process. I drove up during an active winter storm. Visibility was poor. Wind cut across the pass hard enough to rock the truck. Monarch sits above 11,000 feet, and in January, isolation is total. No towns, no services, just road, snow, and forest. The first irregularity was silence. No birds, no tracks crossing the highway, not even small mammal sign along the shoulders. I deployed trail cameras, motion sensors, and GPS tag readers. The data confirmed what I was seeing: a complete biological void inside the marked zone. While checking camera placement, I noticed the memorials, crosses, photos laminated against snow, names and dates. I counted 19, dot records filled in the rest. 41 fatal accidents between 1987 and 2022, concentrated entirely within those 3 miles. Engineering reports showed no structural fault. Patrol logs blamed weather. The numbers didn't support it. On my third afternoon, at 4:15 p.m., I watched a westbound sedan brake suddenly. No obstruction, no traffic. The driver swerved, crossed lanes, and slid off-road. When I reached her, she was shaking uncontrollably. There were people, she said, standing there. There were no footprints, no heat signatures. Patrol cleared her medically, no impairment. That night, I filed a supplemental report. It was returned to me the next morning, marked non-actionable. I was advised, off the record, to keep my scope limited to wildlife behavior. Instead, I requested survivor interviews. 17 crashes, 12 survivors, every account matched. People in the road, standing still, forcing evasive maneuvers. Accident scene photographs told the rest. In the background, over multiple years, were shapes investigators had overlooked. Human silhouettes, always stationary. I counted 41. The local historical society confirmed the origin, January 1987. A church bus, mile marker 229, avalanche-triggered crash. All 41 passengers killed, or so the report said. When I requested autopsy files, the delay was immediate. Weeks passed. Records arrived partially redacted. Cause of death: hypothermia and asphyxiation. Time of death: hours after impact. Dot admitted the bus had never been fully recovered. Liability concerns: terrain instability. When I proposed removal, the resistance was quiet but firm. Permits stalled. Funding approvals slowed. Only when I documented ongoing risk and forwarded it to a federal transportation safety liaison did the state move. The recovery was conducted under controlled conditions. No media, no observers. As the bus was lifted, temperature dropped sharply. Visibility worsened. And along the highway they appeared. 41 figures. Watching. No one spoke. No one approached. After the bus was transported, interior inspection revealed claw marks. Not impact damage. Panic damage. Since removal, accidents ceased. Wildlife returned immediately. Officially, the case is closed. Unofficially, drivers still report a presence at mile marker 229. And every January 17th, lights appear below the road. Searching. There is still no state memorial. And I still wonder how many other sites were left behind because recovery was inconvenient, and how many are still waiting for someone to stop. The Ohio Turnpike Rest Area. I spent most of my adult life managing systems that were designed not to be noticed. As operations manager for the Ohio Turnpike and Infrastructure Commission, my job was to make sure traffic flowed, facilities stayed open, and problems were resolved before anyone outside the organization became aware they existed. I worked standard hours, kept meticulous logs, and trusted process over intuition. I believed that if something went wrong, there would always be a mechanical explanation, a staffing error, or a procedural gap that could be corrected. By 2019, I had been with the Commission for nearly 16 years. I lived quietly outside Toledo, commuted the same route every day, and expected to retire on schedule without incident. That expectation did not survive November. The first indication of a problem came through routine complaint summaries forwarded to my office in mid-October 2019. Lakeview Service Plaza, mile marker 118 eastbound near Sandusky, was one of our highest traffic rest areas, serving thousands of travelers daily. The complaints were unusual but not alarming at first. Travelers reported incorrect food orders, directions that didn't make sense, and staff members who seemed overly confident even when they were wrong. These are common issues in facilities with high turnover, and my initial assumption was a training lapse. I instructed regional management to review procedures and scheduled a follow-up. Within days, the complaints escalated in tone, if not in content. People described staff members as acting wrong. Some said the employees' facial expressions didn't match what they were saying, smiling while delivering bad news, staring blankly while laughing. A few reports mentioned employees following travelers to their vehicles at a consistent distance, then turning back without explanation. I began reviewing security footage personally. The behavior on video was subtle but unmistakable once noticed. Employees moved with an unnatural precision. When more than one walked across the floor, their steps synchronized perfectly, left feet striking the ground at the same moment. They held postures too long, stood too still between tasks, and often faced forward even when no customers were present. I scheduled unannounced visits at different hours to observe conditions directly. On November 9, 2019, at approximately 2:30 a.m., I arrived without notifying local management. The plaza was nearly empty. 2 travelers sat at opposite ends of the seating area. 4 employees were visible, each stationed behind a different counter. They were standing perfectly still, hands resting at identical angles, all facing forward. I approached the information desk. The woman's name tag read Linda. She smiled immediately, but her eyes did not change. She asked how she could help me, in a voice that was flat and evenly paced. I identified myself and requested the night manager. She maintained her smile and told me there was no night manager on duty. That contradicted staffing requirements. When I pressed, she tilted her head sharply to the left, an angle that looked strained, and repeated that she could help me instead. I walked past the desk into the staff-only area. Linda did not attempt to stop me. She watched, head still tilted, until I disappeared from view. The night manager's office was empty. His computer was logged in and active. The break room and storage areas were unoccupied. When I returned to the main floor, all 4 employees were no longer at their counters. They stood in a straight line in the center of the plaza, facing me. In unison, they asked if they could help. I backed toward the exit. They did not follow, but their heads turned together to track my movement. Once outside, I contacted Turnpike Police and waited in my vehicle. Through the glass, I watched the employees return to their counters and resume normal activity. When Turnpike Police arrived, the plaza appeared entirely normal. The employees were polite, professional, and individually responsive. The night manager was present and claimed he had been in the restroom during my earlier search. I reviewed the security footage from my visit later that morning. It showed a routine interaction. No line formation, no synchronized movement. The employees never left their stations. The discrepancy between the footage and my memory could not be reconciled by equipment failure. I initiated a formal internal investigation. Human Resources was instructed to pull employment records for the 4 night shift employees I had encountered: Linda, Marcus, Stephanie, and James. Their uniforms and name tags were legitimate. Payroll records showed hours worked and wages paid. but there were no hiring documents, no tax forms, no background checks. According to our system, they did not exist. Day managers confirmed they had seen them working regularly. I confronted the day manager, Doris, who had overseen the plaza for 12 years. When I showed her the photographs, her reaction was immediate and unguarded. She asked where I had gotten them, and then told me they were not employees. She retrieved a folder she had kept hidden in her office. Inside were newspaper clippings from November 1986. A tour bus carrying employees of a manufacturing company to a corporate retreat had crashed at mile marker 118. 40 people were on board. 4 survived. Their photographs were printed beneath the headline: Linda, Marcus, Stephanie, and James. They were identical to the individuals working the night shift now, unchanged by time. Doris explained that the service plaza had been built 2 years after the crash, directly over the site. During construction, workers reported voices, misplaced tools, and figures seen in empty areas. After opening, staff noticed the same 4 people appearing at night, always helpful, always slightly wrong. Doris believed they were trying to finish their trip, mistaking the plaza for their destination. I ordered that all night shifts be staffed exclusively with verified employees and personally reviewed credentials for every person working between 10 p.m. and 6 a.m. Despite this, traveler complaints continued. Customers reported being served by the 4, buying coffee from Marcus, receiving directions from Linda. Security footage showed only real employees performing those tasks. To eliminate blind spots, I authorized installation of additional cameras. On November 23rd, at 3:47 a.m., I found definitive evidence. A camera reflected the coffee counter in a mirrored surface. The physical employee, Derek, was cleaning equipment with his back turned. In the reflection, Linda was serving a customer, pouring coffee, accepting payment. Derek never noticed. I compiled the footage, witness statements, employment records, and historical documentation, and presented it to senior management. 1 week later, I was offered early retirement with full benefits in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement. Lakeview Service Plaza was temporarily closed for renovations. When it reopened, the interior layout was completely changed. The reports resumed within weeks. The 4 were still there. The plaza remains operational. Most travelers notice nothing. Some do. The Commission maintains that no anomaly exists. I am not supposed to be telling you this. But the 4 are still working, still helping, still trying to complete a journey that ended in 1986. They do not appear to understand what they are, and the institution responsible for that stretch of road has decided that silence is preferable to explanation. The New Mexico Highway Mirage. I am an atmospheric scientist by training. For most of my career, my work has been predictable. Temperature gradients, refractive indices, light behavior over long distances. I specialized in optical phenomena because they are measurable, repeatable, and almost always explainable. Mirages looming, inferior images over hot pavement, these are not mysteries, they are equations. I taught, consulted, published, and advised transportation agencies when visual anomalies created safety risks. My daily life in 2020 was quiet. I split my time between a university lab and contract field work. I lived alone in Albuquerque, kept regular hours, and avoided anything that couldn't be quantified. In May of that year, I was contacted by the New Mexico Department of Transportation. The request was framed as routine. There had been multiple reports of road mirages on a stretch of I-25 between Albuquerque and Santa Fe northbound lanes, usually mid-afternoon. Drivers were claiming that the highway ahead of them appeared to change. Lane markings, surface color, even the surrounding terrain. The phenomenon lasted seconds, then reverted. 3 accidents had already been attributed to sudden braking or swerving. NMDOT wanted a formal explanation they could include in a safety bulletin. At the time, I assumed it would be a standard inferior mirage amplified by heat and elevation. That stretch of highway runs through high desert, with sharp temperature gradients and long sight lines. I accepted the contract and began reviewing incident reports. The language stood out immediately. Drivers weren't describing reflections or shimmering. They were describing a different road, convincingly real, occupying the same space as the existing one. I began field observations the following week. I drove the route repeatedly, northbound only, at varying times of day. My vehicle was outfitted with calibrated cameras, temperature probes, humidity sensors, and light refraction monitors. For the first 3 days, nothing unusual occurred. The data showed normal conditions. On the 4th drive, May 14th, at approximately 2:47 p.m., the highway ahead of me changed. There is no other accurate way to phrase it. The asphalt darkened. The yellow center lines became white. The shoulders narrowed. The rock formations ahead were wrong. Older, more eroded, with vegetation patterns inconsistent with current surveys. The change lasted perhaps 3 seconds before the scene snapped back to normal. I did not react physically. I maintained speed and lane position. Training took over. The important thing was the data. When I reviewed the footage later, the cameras had captured the same change I saw. Frame by frame, the pavement texture shifted. The wear patterns were inconsistent with modern resurfacing. The roadside plants visible during the event included species that, according to state ecological records, had not been present in that area since the mid-20th century. That eliminated a purely perceptual explanation. I requested historical highway records from the New Mexico State Records Center. I-25, in that section, was constructed in 1967. Before that, the primary north-south route was U.S. Route 85. When I overlaid Route 85 maps with current I-25 schematics, the alignment was nearly identical. In many places, the interstate had been built directly over the older highway. I then reviewed accident records. Between 1952 and 1966, Route 85 had an unusually high fatal accident rate in that exact segment. 13 deaths in 14 years. The police reports were strikingly similar. Drivers swerved suddenly or braked hard for no apparent reason. Several survivors reported seeing the wrong road or a highway that didn't belong there. The symmetry was difficult to ignore. In the 1950s, drivers claimed to see a future road. In 2020, drivers were seeing the past. I presented my findings to a colleague specializing in quantum mechanics. His hypothesis was cautious but disturbing. Under specific atmospheric conditions, combined with electromagnetic properties of asphalt and subsurface geology, it might be possible for temporal overlap to occur, brief moments where 2 versions of the same location became mutually observable. To test this, I needed controlled observation. I converted a small RV into a mobile monitoring station and returned to the highway on May 19th. At 2:51 p.m., all systems recorded anomalies simultaneously. Electromagnetic readings spiked. Temperature sensors fluctuated by 15 degrees in under 2 seconds. The road ahead transformed. This time, it lasted nearly 15 seconds. I was looking at Route 85 as it existed in the late 1950s. I could see a vehicle ahead of me, a 1957 Chevrolet, blue, traveling at highway speed. I could see the driver clearly. He was leaning forward, gripping the wheel, staring directly at me with an expression of fear I have never forgotten. Then the overlap ended. The modern highway returned. The car was gone. Every recording device captured it. I submitted a full report to NMDOT. Within a week, my contract was terminated. The report was classified as non-actionable. I was advised not to pursue the matter further. No public explanation was issued beyond vague warnings about optical illusions. I continued independently. I located families of Route 85 accident victims and obtained personal journals, letters, and statements. 13 separate accounts described seeing vehicles from the future, larger, faster, unfamiliar, appearing and vanishing. One journal, written in 1959, ended with a warning that highway is showing us things that shouldn't be there yet. In June 2020, another accident occurred at mile marker 242. The driver survived. She reported swerving to avoid a blue 1959 Chevrolet traveling the wrong direction. Her car showed blue paint transfer on the bumper. The paint composition matched formulations used in the late 1950s. There was no source vehicle. Since then, the incidents have increased in frequency and duration. NMDOT installed warning signs and reduced speed limits. They did not close the road. They could not. 2 drivers have disappeared entirely in the past 3 years. Their vehicles were found abandoned, engines running. I believe they crossed during an overlap and did not return. Somewhere, they are still driving a road that no longer exists, and somewhere, drivers from the past may be driving ours. The highway remains open, and time on that stretch of road is still not stable. The Montana Snowstorm Loop. My name is Robert Fisher. I drove commercial trucks for 31 years, across every continental state. Before February 2021, my life followed a fixed rhythm: pre-trip inspections, logbooks, weather checks, fuel calculations. I trusted systems. I trusted miles and markers. When you drive long enough, you learn that survival depends on respecting procedure and ignoring fear. I had never missed a delivery window, never lost a load, never walked away from a route because of weather alone. The trigger event was a standard assignment: electronics from Seattle to Minneapolis. I planned the route myself, factoring winter conditions through Montana. Forecasts showed a storm system moving east, but nothing outside tolerance. I'd crossed I-90 in worse conditions. I calculated that I could clear the higher elevations before the blizzard intensified. That calculation was wrong. The storm overtook me west of Butte around 11 p.m. Visibility collapsed in minutes. Snow erased the horizon and flattened depth perception. Highway patrol closed exits behind me, relayed over emergency radio. Turning back wasn't an option. The next services were in Bozeman, 75 miles ahead. I reduced speed, locked into the right lane, and drove by instrument and instinct. Isolation set in quickly. The storm muted everything. No oncoming headlights, no taillights behind me. Just the white cone of my own beams and the dark seam of asphalt underneath. Cell service dropped out. CB radio returned nothing but static. According to the GPS, the road ahead was straight and clear. After what felt like 2 hours, I checked my odometer. I'd covered 15 miles. That matched my speed, but I should have passed at least 3 exits. I'd passed none. I checked the GPS again. It showed my position frozen at mile marker 241. I recalibrated, same result. Marker 241, I kept driving. 30 more minutes passed. 8 more miles on the odometer. No signs, no exits, just the same stretch of road repeating itself in my headlights. I marked the time in my logbook, but when I looked at my watch, it had stopped at 11:47 p.m. The first irregular relief came as taillights ahead of me. Another vehicle, about 100 yards out. I followed at a safe distance, grateful not to be alone. The tracks in the snow gave me something to trust. After a while, I noticed the tread pattern. It matched my own tires exactly. I slowed. The distance widened but never closed entirely. I accelerated. The taillights grew clearer. The vehicle ahead was a semi, same model, same trailer configuration, same company logo. I realized I was following my own truck. I stopped hard. The truck ahead didn't. It continued forward and faded into the snow. I sat there idling, trying to reset my thinking. Hallucination was the only explanation that made sense. But my instruments were consistent. My odometer worked. My fuel gauge read a quarter tank, down from half exactly as expected. I started moving again. 20 minutes later, the taillights reappeared. Same distance, same alignment. I keyed the CB. "Driver ahead, this is Fisher. Do you copy?" After a burst of static, a voice answered. My voice. "This is Fisher. Who is this?" I dropped the mic. The transmission continued anyway. "If anyone can hear this, I've been driving for hours and I don't know where I am." I picked it up again. Asked what mile marker he was at. The reply came after a pause. 241. I keep passing it, but it never changes. As I drove, more taillights appeared, one beyond the next, then another. A chain of identical trucks, all moving at the same speed, all mine. The CB filled with overlapping transmissions, all my voice describing the same conditions from different points. Some claimed hours, some claimed days, one said weeks. The first hard evidence came later, after I escaped, but it was forming then. My truck's electronic logbook, GPS pings, fuel data, all recording continuous motion without location change. At the time, I only knew that systems I'd trusted for decades were agreeing with each other while reality did not. Institutional help never arrived. I tried emergency channels. Nothing answered. Patrol frequencies were silent. Later, I learned that search advisories had gone out when I failed to check in, but nothing reached me inside that stretch. The escalation into danger wasn't speed or collision. It was the realization that stopping didn't help. I tested it. I put the truck in park in the middle of the highway. The taillights ahead kept moving. Headlights appeared in my mirrors. One of the identical trucks passed me, close enough that I saw the driver clearly. It was me, eyes forward, unresponsive. That meant the loop wasn't tied to my movement. It existed independently. The critical discovery came when the road ahead changed. My headlights caught something solid across all lanes, a wall, dark and reflective, stretching from shoulder to shoulder. It looked like ice, but wrong, thicker, moving slowly as if under pressure. The CB erupted with warnings from the other versions of me. "Don't stop. Keep driving." I was already stopped. The wall advanced. As it drew closer, I saw reflections in it. Hundreds of them, each one me, frozen at different moments of awareness. The life-threatening confrontation was unavoidable. The wall kept coming. Reverse did nothing. Tires spun. One truck ahead accelerated and hit the wall head-on. There was no crash sound. The truck disappeared. Where it struck, the wall cracked. Light came through, real daylight. I drove. The truck shook. Mirrors shattered. Metal strained. The crack widened just enough. I crossed through it and emerged onto dry pavement in daylight, near mile marker 244 outside Bozeman. Traffic flowed normally. No storm, no wall. The aftermath unfolded on paper. My phone showed February 23rd, 6:47 a.m. I'd entered the storm 8 hours earlier by my perception. My logbook and GPS showed 63 continuous hours of driving within a 3-mile stretch. I'd been reported missing. Patrol searches found nothing because, officially, I was never there. The institutional response was medical dismissal, hypothermia, exhaustion, hallucination. The data anomalies were archived and classified as equipment failure. No formal investigation followed. Records of other missing trucks during storms were difficult to access and heavily redacted. I retired within weeks, sold the truck, moved south. I no longer drive in snow. The unresolved threat is ongoing. I still hear CB transmissions late at night, static, then my own voice asking for help at mile marker 241. The loop is still there, and some versions of me never found the wall. The Louisiana Bayou Bypass. My name is Claire Beaumont, and for 17 years I worked as a detective with the Louisiana State Police in criminal investigations, a role that trained me to reduce chaos into timelines, evidence logs, and conclusions that could survive court scrutiny. And for most of my career that approach worked, because even the worst crimes usually followed patterns that made sense once you stayed with them long enough. And in early 2022, my life had settled into that familiar rhythm of case reviews, late-night calls, and long drives through rural parishes, living alone outside Lafayette, believing that experience and procedure were enough to handle whatever crossed my desk, until I was assigned a cluster of missing persons cases connected to a road most people in southern Louisiana barely remembered existed. State Route 407, a 15-mile bypass cutting through deep bayou country that had been built in the 1970s as a hurricane evacuation route, and then quietly abandoned as traffic patterns shifted. And between January and April of that year, 5 people vanished while traveling that road. Their vehicles found abandoned with engines running, doors open, wallets and phones left behind, no witnesses, no signs of struggle. And at first, the assumption was that it was drug-related because the bayou has always been a smuggling corridor where disappearances sometimes come with the territory, until the 4th victim turned out to be a parish priest with no criminal history and the 5th was a state highway inspector whose job was literally to assess road safety. And that was when the case landed with me. And I started by doing what I always did, driving the route during daylight, documenting pavement conditions, sight lines, access points, and the general environment, and Route 407 in daylight looked exactly like a forgotten piece of infrastructure. Cracked asphalt, rusted guardrails, overgrown shoulders, cypress trees draped in moss pressing in from both sides, standing water stretching out into swamp on either side of the road, no houses, no businesses, no places to stop, just a narrow ribbon of pavement through wetlands where sound seemed to die the moment you stepped out of your vehicle. And when I interviewed locals in nearby communities, most of them avoided the road entirely. Not with fear, exactly, but with a kind of resigned certainty. Like you don't walk into deep water you can't see the bottom of. And one woman, Mrs. Arsenault, remembered an old rest stop near mile marker 7 that had closed decades earlier after what she described only as unsafe conditions, telling me people used to pull in there and never come back, that the state shut it down but never really looked into why, and while I dismissed her mention of things living in the bayou as superstition, I couldn't dismiss the consistency of her memory with the disappearance locations. So I pulled property records and found that a rest stop had indeed existed at that mile marker from 1974 to 1986, officially demolished in 1998, with closure notes that were vague to the point of uselessness. and when I overlaid that information with the GPS coordinates where the abandoned vehicles had been found, they clustered around that same stretch of road. And security footage from a gas station at the junction where Route 407 branched off Highway 90 showed all 5 victims entering the bypass alone between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. and never returning, which left me with a working theory that required first-hand observation under the same conditions. And despite my supervisor advising against it and suggesting the case might be reassigned due to limited resources, I decided to drive the road at night myself, using an unmarked unit and a body camera, entering Route 407 at 11:37 p.m. on April 28, 2022, and immediately noticing how different it felt after dark. The tree canopy swallowing my headlights so completely that it felt like driving through a tunnel of black water, reflections flashing off the swamp on both sides, my radio going dead at mile marker 3, cell service dropping out entirely, all of which was expected in remote areas but still registered as isolating. And when I reached mile marker 7, I saw lights ahead, not moving like headlights but fixed, stationary. And as I slowed, I realized I was looking at a rest stop, intact, lit, with a newly paved parking lot and a small building with fluorescent lights. And I remember stopping my vehicle and checking my notes because that structure should not have existed. It had been demolished over 20 years earlier, and yet there it was, solid and unmistakable, and I pulled in, stepped out of my car, and noticed the air smelled wrong, thick and organic, like rot held just below the surface, and through the glass door I could see inside the building, 2 people standing at vending machines, a man and a woman dressed in clothing styles that hadn't been common for decades. And when I opened the door and they turned toward me, their faces were gray and slack, skin hanging loosely, eye sockets empty, and their smiles showed teeth that were too long, too exposed. And I drew my weapon and backed away, my training overriding shock, and they followed me to the doorway but did not cross it, just stood there watching as I retreated to my vehicle, and as I reversed out, I recognized one of the other cars in the lot as a 1995 Ford Explorer that matched the description of a vehicle from an older disappearance Mrs. Arsenault had mentioned. And while I drove back toward the road, the rest stop began to change, the lights flickering, the building appearing older and more deteriorated with each second, the pavement cracking. And by the time I reached the roadway, it was gone, replaced by ruins exactly where the rest stop was supposed to have been, and I drove straight to the parish sheriff's office and reported everything. And when we reviewed my body camera footage, it showed me walking into empty space, pointing my weapon at nothing, backing away from air, but the audio was intact, capturing my voice, the sound of a door opening, and beneath it all low laughter, wet and layered, coming from multiple sources. And at dawn, a joint team returned to the site and found fresh tire tracks, mine and others leading into the ruins. And beneath collapsed concrete, we uncovered a concealed staircase descending into the ground, and tactical units and rescue specialists were called in. And I descended with 3 other officers into a network of man-made tunnels with crumbling concrete walls, filled with vehicles arranged in neat rows like a subterranean parking structure. Cars and trucks dating from the 1970s through 2022, including the highway inspector's vehicle, but no bodies, and deeper still, we found living quarters with beds and furniture from different eras and walls covered in names and dates. Hundreds of them, many matching missing persons reports tied to Route 407 over nearly 50 years, and at the end of one tunnel we cut through a locked metal door and entered a chamber occupied by dozens of people whose skin hung gray and loose and whose eyes were empty, sitting or standing silently, breathing slowly, and one of my officers recognized his uncle who had disappeared in 1989. And when he called out, the figure turned and smiled, and when we tried to move them, they resisted without violence, simply refusing to leave, and one of them spoke, the highway inspector, his voice layered and wrong, saying they couldn't leave, that the road brought them there, and some nights it opened, and we called for medical and federal support, and within hours jurisdiction was transferred, the site sealed, the official explanation citing environmental hazards and structural instability. Families told recovery wasn't possible, and Route 407 quietly reclassified while remaining physically open. And I retired 2 months later because I could no longer reconcile what I'd seen with the reports I was expected to sign. And since then, additional disappearances have been quietly logged and absorbed into unrelated case files. And sometimes, late at night, I listen again to the audio from my body camera, hearing that laughter beneath my own breathing. And every time I pass the turnoff for Route 407, I notice fresh tire tracks leading into the dark. And I know the road is still doing what it has always done, waiting for travelers who believe roads are just roads, and that if something is dangerous enough, someone would have closed it by now.